in unassuming boxcars traveling the countryside, laid the deadliest weapon to exist. Traveling with 2 locomotives, this small train may look like any other train for a short line. But this train would carry 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles that carried 10 300-kiloton nuclear warheads. This unassuming train would have the power and the ability to send Western Europe back to the Dark Ages. This train would be known as the Peacekeeper Rail garrison. My name is Jamie, and if you're interested in these sorts of videos, do give this video a like and subscribe, as it helps out a lot. Next week's video will be about the advanced passenger train. So I'll go through the development from the very first APT prototype and its development into the APT itself. So tune in next week to find out more. Since 1945, the Pandora's box of sending the world into a nuclear winter has been a very strong possibility. Originally, nuclear weapons had to be delivered by nuclear bombers such as the original B-29, which was responsible for dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the war, in the United States of America, the department that would be responsible for the operation and control of nuclear weapons for both ground and air would be Strategic Air Command. While in 1946, B-29s were perfectly adequate for the task of both first and second strike capabilities. However, over time, fighter aircraft were getting faster and could fly higher and could intercept bomber aircraft before they could even drop the bomb. Strategic Air Command would order newer aircraft that was able to fly higher and faster than the original B-29s. To prevent America's nuclear deterrent being attacked while still being on the ground, it became normal practice to fly nuclear-armed aircraft in case of a war breaking out. While America at this time was no longer facing war and was now starting to face a peacetime requirement, arguments over who should get more funding started to begin. SAC would procure new silo-based ICBMs, such as the original Titan I and Atlas ICBMs. These would also serve later as the genesis for launch vehicles for space exploration. The advantages of silo-based nuclear weapons was that they were able to respond much quicker, and they were extremely hard to intercept compared to submarine-launched ballistic missiles or aircraft. However, due to their fixed location, they were extremely vulnerable to first strike opportunities by foreign powers. To compete with funding, the Navy had their own solution. What if you could launch nuclear weapons from their submarines? There were massive potential advantages to it. Unlike land-based nuclear silos, they weren't stationary, and they could hypothetically be anywhere in the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean, and would just need to launch their missiles and glide away. With the advantages of nuclear-powered submarines and further improvements that would be able to launch missiles from below the surface, preventing the enemy from being able to counter these weapons, these became a perfect first strike and second strike solution, as it would be near unkillable. This would become a reality when the US Navy launched USS George Washington SSBN 598. This was armed with 16 Polaris A-1 missiles, and they would be equipped with the W-47 warhead, having a yield of 600 kilotons. One thing to note is that with submarine-launched ballistic missiles is that they do have a smaller yield compared to general ICBMs, just because a missile is a lot smaller. The Navy argued that they would be the main nuclear force and be responsible for nuclear deterrence due to the simple advantages of using nuclear submarines armed with nuclear weapons. The US Air Force would argue with their land-based silos armed with the Atlas and Titan I ICBMs, while also deciding they could achieve the same results of deterrence with aircraft armed with nuclear weapons. The US government would instead choose all three, and forming part of the nuclear triad, as all three had their disadvantages and advantages. This would mean using all three systems would allow them to negate any disadvantages. It is also important that the nuclear triad still plays a huge part as a nuclear deterrent. These days, one of the most important concepts to understand when it comes to nuclear weapons is the concept of mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction is still guaranteed to this day, as a foreign power, if they could come out better than the other side, the nuclear option could be seen as a tempting choice. The worst case scenario would actually be a government could justify losing cities if they had a possibility of justifying the cost of winning the war. The only way to win this game is to simply not play the game. MAD remains an important policy of today in terms of nuclear deterrence for Beijing, Moscow, Washington, London, and Paris. No country would rest on its laurels trying to get ahead in terms of the nuclear arms race. One possibility of getting ahead was the idea of shooting down the nuclear warhead before it reaches a target and detonates. This is named the Anti-Ballistic Missile, or ABM for short. In the 80s, a proposal nicknamed Star Wars sought to put space-based X-ray lasers that could intercept ICBMs in mid-flight. This was later upgraded to chemical lasers, which later destroyed a Titan missile booster during testing. These days, the research flowed into Lockheed Martin's Helios laser system, which was recently placed on USS Pebble, which was able to eliminate a cruise missile with its laser on board. The second possibility to get ahead is to prevent the enemy from targeting your weapons. The Soviet Union would develop road-going versions of the Topol-M ICBMs that could be launched either from truck or silo. In the early 1960s, specifically 1960, the United States Air Force tested the possibility of launching nuclear weapons by rail. This would be named the Minuteman Mobility Test Train under Operation Big Star. This concept was tested as it was possible to reduce the vulnerability to Soviet missiles compared to regular silo-based weapons. This train would be run all over America, initially running over the Union Pacific, the Western Pacific, and the Denver and Rio Grande. From the information gathered regarding the concept, it seems like these trains would only use one locomotive initially. The second possibility to get ahead is to prevent the enemy from targeting your weapons. The Soviet Union would develop road-going versions of the Topol-M ICBMs that could be launched either from truck or silo. In the early 1960s, specifically 1960, the United States Air Force tested the possibility of launching nuclear weapons by rail. This would be named the Minuteman Mobility Test Train under Operation Big Star. This concept was tested as it was possible to reduce the vulnerability to Soviet missiles compared to regular silo-based weapons. This train would be run all over America, initially running over the Union Pacific, the Western Pacific, and the Denver and Rio Grande. From the information gathered regarding the concept, it seems like these trains would only use one locomotive initially. These trains would normally run with 10 cars in total, one holding the Minuteman, 4 auxiliaries holding such things as water, fuel, and the power car, 5 for living and working quarters for the crew. To reduce costs of this program, Army-owned passenger cars would be rebuilt to house the crew better and give them better conditions overall. ACF would build the special railroad car that would house the Minuteman ICBM. Later on, plans would be expanded to hopefully use a radio launch network with the program. The Minuteman trains would be shelved on May 19, 1961 temporarily. However, they would later be outright cancelled on December 14th that year. The administration found that rail-based missiles were more expensive than silo sites overall. However, despite the prototypes existing, they did end up finding a new purpose after the test had ended. They would become ICBM transport trains. They would hopefully move newly built missiles to their silos. The United States Air Force would keep the concept in mind, as in 1986, 26 years later, Ronald Reagan approved the development of another rail-based system for the in-development LGM-118 Peacekeeper missile, or the MX missile for Missile Experimental at the time. This hoped to give the United States a new second strike option if the nuclear silos had been hit on a first strike by the Soviet Union. The reason why rail was that it allowed easy movement of the weapons across the country, while preventing the enemy from being able to target the train before it launches its ICBMs. From the get-go, 50 trains-based launches were planned for 25 trains overall, giving each train 2 launches equipped with the Peacekeeper ICBM. The Peacekeeper Rail garrison was a train that would hold 2 Peacekeeper launchers. The locomotives planned for this train was 2 Jeep 40-2s modified to the Jeep 40-2 DE standard. This modification included dynamic braking and extended range fuel tanks. 2 boxcars, which were later modified to hold troops to protect the train. 2 launches, a launch control car, and a fuel car, and a maintenance car to assist in basic maintenance on the train. The train's goal was to blend in as a small freight train, unlike the older Minuteman mobility test, which resembled a military train. The whole train would have 42 people to crew it. Testing of the Peacekeeper Rail garrison would begin in 1989. Strategic Air Command wanted to station the first rail garrisons near Warren Air Force Base near the Union Pacific Main Line in Wyoming. It was expected that these trains would enter service at the end of 1992. When in storage, these trains would be protected by hardened shelters made from steel and earth. The Peacekeeper launch cars were built from high-cube boxcars by the St. Louis Refrigerator Car Company. SAC wanted these trains all over the country, with missile crew on standby, ready for the worst-case situation. Upon an increase in the DEFCON rating, the trains would enter the rail network, allowing them to bend in, and for the enemy to be unable to determine where the weapons are. The first prototype of the launch system would arrive on October 4th, 1990. Overall, the program was very successful, achieving its goal of being a successful rail-based ICBM launch system. However, this system would be cancelled due to the collapse of the Soviet Union, meaning the rail garrison simply wasn't needed anymore. The Cold War had ended, and the fear of atomic annihilation would be subsided. One of these railcars still exists in a museum. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Ohio has one in preservation. Now, that'll be the end of the video, and I just want to say thank you for your continued support, and it's seriously appreciated. I hope that I can always make content that you guys watch and enjoy. I hope to see you at next week's video about the British Rail's APT train. This train was pretty cool. I personally have a whole new model of one, and like I say, it does look fantastic tilting through the curves. So, hope to see you there, and don't forget to like this video, and I just want to say thank you from me, my partner, and my pet rabbit, Mr. Morris.